The people who were wiped out will never forget it. But if you live in a house that was not damaged, that you dodged a bullet, those folks have the shortest memory.
You're listening to Good is in the Details. I'm Gwendolyn
And I'm Rudy Sallow.
And this is the podcast where we learn what we didn't know in the spirit of Socrates, all with the aim of a more knowledgeable life, a happy life. And today we have a returning guest. Actually, this is a pretty important episode. We have a returning guest. We watched his documentary, The Last House Standing. It was a great episode we did a couple of years ago, and we invited him back to get some insight about the recovery efforts in California when it comes to the fires. I'm glad we're revisiting this topic because the way that the news cycle goes, it's on nobody's mind, but people are still suffering. And so I like bringing this issue back up to talk about how to be safe, what to do, how to prepare for your home, what kinds of questions should you be asking as a homeowner, how can you in your community help and be knowledgeable about the policies and things like that. So I loved this episode with George.
Yeah, George came on again. I've been on his podcast. This is the second time he's on our podcast. He grew up in Pacific Palisades. I suggest you go back and listen to the first episode that George is on. It's called
I'll link it.
Climate is Above Politics. And then listen to all the horrible things that we predicted could happen. A lot of it happened. Now we have George back on to talk about how we can build back better. George's prior film, The Last House Standing, but he has a brand new film out about climate resilient building, and it's been winning a lot of rewards. It's called Built to Last, Buyer Beware. George is a great filmmaker. He's the type of filmmaker that we need today when our infrastructure and our homes are faced and riddled with all of these dangers, hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires. This is a great episode to talk about building for the future. So Gwen, really quickly, not to put you on the spot, but what is a philosophical teaching that came out of this episode that, for all of our hardcore philosophy people, what philosophical teaching do we address during this episode, would you say?
It's something that stands out to me and that stood out to me from our previous episode with him is when we're in political philosophy and we're talking about designing and organizing a government and a structure, that there is this tension between individual responsibility and the responsibility of the state. And so we see we can talk about that in the classroom and have all sorts of theories and everything and arguments and syllogisms and whatnot. But when we have an episode like this, it really lays bare the reality of that tension between the individual and the society. And when it comes to responsibility and when it comes to what is the role of government and what is the role of the person. And then there is also the very human aspect of understanding care and empathy when it comes to our neighbors. So if your home survived, you still need to take care of your community, right? Like there's no such thing as just being the only person that made it in scenarios like this if your town is gone. So it makes us rethink the structure of community and what does it mean to be a neighbor and what does it mean to thrive and flourish. So we talk about these things in theory, but again, when we have somebody like George come on, and we are a philosophy podcast, but we are seeing what this looks like in a concrete situation, the kinds of conversations that we need to have that go back to these principles of what does it mean to enjoy your life and what does it mean to be a good citizen and what does it mean to be a responsible citizen. So that's what I get out of this episode. And thank you, George, again, for coming on the pod. Just before we get started, I wanted to let everybody know, we have an online course if you want to learn how to podcast, but I've also set up that you can contact us through our website, goodisinthedetails.com. If you would like a Zoom meeting, if you have an idea for a podcast and you just need to know where to start, set up an appointment and we can do that for you. Okay, now let's talk about recovery, the neighbors. Wait, what are we going to call this? We're talking about the LA fires. Yeah.
I'll come up with something and I'll text it to you.
Okay. All right, everybody. Let's talk with George Siegal. Your film, Last House Standing, that has been on my mind. And that was on my mind because there were images, I believe it was from the Malibu fires, of one house that was still standing and everything else was ash. And so then the question is, how is that house standing? The other thing that I've been thinking about from our previous conversation is, even if you do have the house that's standing, your neighborhood's gone. There's no grocery store, there's no school, there's no library. So, George, tell us what your thoughts are. Let's get into this. What do we have to learn? What do you think? This is your wheelhouse.
Well, first of all, you have to be hopeful and hope that people will actually learn. But when I watch the news and I see the president and the mayor out there and the governor, and they're all talking about, well, we're going to relax the building code so people can rebuild as quickly as possible, that's not necessarily a good thing. I know if your house burns down, you want to get back in it. You want to get on your property. You want to start building back. And I know with the Coastal Commission and all the rules there, it can be a lengthy process to rebuild a house, especially if it's an older one and you want to modernize it. But the problem is, what are you doing differently when you build back? What are you changing? We just had 2 hurricanes in my neighborhood, and all the one-story houses pretty much flooded. And some of the people are selling their lots and they're tearing them down and build it. The person that buys it is building a house that can withstand a flood. And then other people are just remodeling and they're fixing it. So what are they doing different? I ask them all the time when I'm walking around, and the answer is nothing. They're just hoping it doesn't happen again. So this fire was predictable. When I interviewed the mayor of Malibu, the former mayor, on my podcast a year ago, he said this area from Topanga Canyon to the Palisades is ripe and ready to go, and it's going to be a disaster when it happens. So they knew it could happen, and it did happen, and it's so tragic because people's lives are ruined now.
Yeah. I was trying to explain to people because, people were wondering about, well, what about the firefighters, or why don't you just have water or something like that? And I said, no, this is season finale Game of Thrones Dragon's Breath. That's what this is. It, like, people can't understand, the flames are not going up toward the sky. They were going to the side. The flames are working a path. It's a hurricane, a wall of fire. It's just hard to really communicate how devastating that was and how scary, because, you've also got the ash, the debris everywhere. You can't go outside. Like, even if you are okay, you can't go outside because the air quality is just shot.
It's unbelievable. And, there are some disasters and you say, okay, what can people do now, or what could they have done? The first thing that could have been done, and the most obvious, is prevent the fire from ever happening, or prevent the fuel source for being there that made the fire as awful as it was. Short of doing that, when you get a Santa Ana wind like that and a firestorm like that, a lot of houses aren't going to survive no matter how you build them. When you have a house that's built to withstand a hurricane, but you get a Category 5 hurricane with a storm surge and tornadoes spawn, anything could happen. It could destroy even the most sturdy house. So there's some disasters that are unavoidable. In that case, you wanted to have had insurance. You wanted to have had a go box to evacuate. You wanted to get as many memories out of there as you could, because sometimes it's just a horrible disaster and there's nothing you can do. But in other instances, there are things that you could do. So the question is, how prepared do you need to be for a disaster? How much can you afford to prepare? What kind of risk are you willing to take? When I was growing up in Pacific Palisades, it was more of a small town. We had a place called the Hot Dog Show. It was a little restaurant where a train would go around above everybody and you could go there and get hot dogs. There was a movie theater where you could see movies for 99 cents. It just had a different feel. Than it kind of grew up into a little more of a bigger town or a small city. But they kept building deeper and deeper into the canyon, into the woods. And that's taking a risk. I'm not saying anybody deserves it. If you have a beautiful home in the canyon, you hope nothing ever happens. But when something does happen, you realize, damn, I only have one way out of here. There's no way to get water in here. Water works great if you're the only house on the block on fire. But if everybody's on fire, there's not going to be any water pressure. And that's probably a whole other podcast, whether water was mismanaged. Pointing fingers now is good for insurance claims, but it doesn't help you get your memories back if you lost everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a very good point, George. And a lot of reasons why we asked you back on. I mean, I don't know if you went back and listened to our episode. It's extremely prophetic. In fact, you mentioned on there that you grew up in the Pacific Palisades, that when you were growing up, houses weren't built into these fire zones. However, they were built into these fire zones, and all it takes is one horrible event and everything is gone. And lo and behold, it has happened. So I guess my question comes down to what should the role, and you brought up good points about water, how much water is going to need to be there. If you know anything about LA's history, we have a very sordid history with water. If you just search a little bit out there, you'll see how LA got the vast majority of its water sources. It was from another part of California, which is one of the bases of Chinatown. What is the role, do you think, government should play here? People own the land. The land is there. It may or there may not be a house there anymore, right? It's all in rubble or anything that's there. This is a very difficult and delicate question. I'm really hesitating here because quite frankly, I'm afraid to ask it. But people building into those canyons doesn't just affect those people. It affects everybody around those people. It affects the fire management, the water management. And it's like...
Oh, I see, like a triage situation like you've created where they have to do a cost-benefit analysis, like the resources are so stretched. Is that what you mean?
There's that. There's the fact that people are going to need permits to build. Should it be that governments take into account how dangerous it is to build in granting permits to rebuild? Is that overreaching? I mean, I've been arguing for like fast tracking permitting, getting rid of some of the green tape so we can rebuild. And now I'm kind of struggling. I mean, I'm hearing what you're saying about what it was like when you grew up and what people did after. And no matter what preventative or mitigative measures you put in, you're not going to be able to prevent everything. So what do we do? What is the role of government going forward in managing these risks?
Okay, that's a great question because, the expression, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Talk about overreaching.
Exactly.
It's not bad to have those regulations if you've never let anybody build there. If there's a piece of land sitting there and you say to the community, nobody can build there because it's dangerous, it's a completely different story than telling the Smith family, you can't rebuild your house there because now it's dangerous. We have rights in this country and people want to exercise them, especially when it's their property and it's their valuable home that was destroyed. I get that. And it's very hard to go backwards. So in an instance of if there's a dangerous area of land, I mean, we have that argument here in Florida all the time. Why are we letting people build right by the coast? Why are we letting people build in dangerous areas? Well, once you let them, then you have a problem because how do you take that away from them? Does the government buy it back? Are they going to buy it back what it's worth? That's a tough one, especially in California. I mean, the amount of taxes you guys pay and the amount of government regulations, it's going to cost $150 billion or more to rebuild this. If they had spent $100 million, how much brush could they have cleaned? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm just throwing it out there. If they had tried to prevent the disaster, it would have cost a fraction of what it's costing now to rebuild it. And when you talk about now rebuilding, if you have a block of 20 homes up in the canyon, 19 of them don't clean up right away. How's the 20th even going to build and live around that ash and that mess? So do you collectively clean up? I mean, you guys might be a lot more in tune with how the cleanup is going to go, but I've seen it from hurricanes. Ash is completely different because all the toxic things that melted and were damaged, with a hurricane, they can find the water heater and all the parts eventually wash up somewhere and they clear all that out. And sometimes you're starting from a clean slab because it got washed away. But a fire just creates all the toxic debris and a mess. It's going to be a nightmare. And if your house was fortunate enough to survive, are you able to live there if everybody around you is burned to the ground? Are there services still coming to your house? Is the plumbing working? Is the electricity back to your house? I don't know the answer to any of that stuff, but I don't like a lot of government regulation, but I wish the government did a better job in having tougher building codes and requirements, but you have to be careful how you do that because people are going to fight for their rights.
That's right. That's right. And we live in we talked about this actually on the last episode. We live in a country founded and focused on individual rights as opposed to other types of systems. We are facing this crisis of what to do in rebuilding. I could tell you, I had a cousin that was evacuated. He was fortunate enough to live in one of the Pacific Palisades neighborhoods that survived. That was because they had like a volunteer fire brigade, like watching things and putting out the fires. It was pretty incredible. But he is not moving back in because of all the toxic things that are around his house. His neighborhood is no longer there. His kids go to school in Santa Monica, so they got an apartment for a year in Marina Del Rey, and they don't know when they're going to go back. And I could tell you about the ash. All of that ash, George, blew from the Eaton Fire Pacific Palisades, and it landed here in the South Bay, which is where I live, which is just south of LAX. So while we were safe from the wildfires, the smoke was here. I'm still finding ash around my house. I put on like a whatever KN95 mask and did like a quick sweep of some ash. And then everything kind of came out about you have to have this level of mask. And, now I'm like, oh my God, what did I do to myself? But I didn't want mass massive amounts of ash surrounding my front door and all my doors around my house where my children are coming in and out to go to school. I had to do something. There was no rain. It's a scary time, and I don't know what kind of damage we've caused permanently here. It's difficult. I mean, I'm normally not struggling so hard about a topic on this show. The fires and the monumental task, all of the many different questions that are surrounding these issues in the city that I absolutely love and adore, which is Los Angeles, it's really hard. I'm struggling. I don't know what the right answer is, and I don't think anybody does.
Yeah, it's going to take real leadership on somebody's part to step up and oversee this. And a lot of those older homes, I bet there was a lot of asbestos in those homes. We don't know what burned and what was damaged. So the health risk has to be huge out there. And, here I get some of the local stations, LA stations on my TV. So I watch the coverage and you raised some great points. I don't know how it's going to happen. Because like I say, hurricane cleanup is a little more straightforward. People pile the stuff up at their curb and a truck comes by and takes it. That took a little while, but it's not the same as ashes. It's not the same as, a house that's 90% burnt down and everything else all the infrastructure of the house is melted. As we saw in the last house standing, people's fireproof safes melted. There's one family we interviewed, their pizza oven is the only thing that survived. And the homeowner said she should have put all her jewelry and valuables in her pizza oven because the fireproof safes melted. And it took them 4 or 5 years to rebuild because of the Coastal Commission and how tough they are on the rules to rebuild. So let's just say, Rudy and Gwen, let's just say you relax that and say, okay, look, we're going to let you in quickly and we're going to let you rebuild. What are people going to do? Are you going to think builders are going to make the right choices? I hope there are some that will, but I don't see that very often. They're going to build the house as economically as possible. And insurance isn't going to let you go top shelf automatically. If you have insurance, if you were one of the fortunate ones, they're going to have certain restrictions. So do you have the money to make your house safer? Because there's things you can do to make your house safer. But if you take away the restrictions, what's going to happen? I don't know. That's a great question.
That's what I was thinking about, if stuff will have to be retrofitted the same way we've done with earthquakes, that this is a reality. The fires are a reality. This is every year it's going to be the worst ever. That's what it feels like. I've just been thinking about this infrastructure issue. If it can't be similar to how we try to keep things safe for earthquakes, we have to start doing stuff like that for fires.
Well, look at the Palisades, look at pictures of it, or Altadena, or any of those areas before the fire. And what is one of the things that California is known for? You may have a water shortage, but people water the hell out of their yards, and they have palm trees and lush landscaping and beautiful grounds surrounding their house, even in really condensed areas where houses are close together. That's a disaster. You have a palm tree anywhere near your home, that's like having a Roman candle sitting there. And when those catch on fire, it's more likely that your house is going to burn. We had video in the last house standing of this house that would have survived except the palm trees caught fire and then burned the house down. So there are things everybody can do, but if you don't have big picture thinking, if you don't have a forestation plan to say, okay, now that all this stuff burned, so maybe next year the fire danger is not going to be as high in some of those areas, but once it rains, all that stuff starts to grow and all the stuff quickly comes back. What's the plan to make sure that doesn't happen again? Because you can rebuild everything, but if you don't have a plan for controlling the space beyond people's yards, what's the difference? You're going to have the same problem again.
When you were watching all of this news about California, I would just love to know if you had any facepalm moments, like something that was reported or said and you thought, oh my God. I mean, since you have worked on natural disasters, because I know my facepalm moment was when had to do with the hurricanes in Florida, when it was barreling and it was all this news about how scary and awful it would be. And somebody floated the idea, isn't it interesting how it's happening over red, like politically red areas? And I thought, oh my God, come on. So I want to know, that was my facepalm moment for those. What was your facepalm moment for these LA fires?
I don't know if there was a specific one. Like I say, I was just heartbroken because of that feeling of your community where you grew up has been wiped off the map.
Yeah.
I just had a sick feeling about it. And having lived through coming close to getting wiped out by 2 hurricanes this past hurricane season, it just made me go, people are going, well, fire is much worse than hurricanes. Disaster is a disaster. A lot of people here lost their homes in terms of everything in them from flooding. The difference, though, is they went back and had a structure they could at least work with and make a decision. To me, the fire, I compare this fire to the Mexico Beach hurricane, where the entire area on one side of the highway looked like a bomb went off. because everything was washed away and gone. That was closer to what you guys experienced out there in California. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of moments where you go, why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? You know, you have the mutual aid, you have firefighters, these brave heroes racing into neighborhoods. They don't know these neighborhoods. They don't know the ins and outs of what's going on. It sounds like there were no cops navigating to get people out of the neighborhoods when they were trying to evacuate. That's why so many people left cars on the side of the road. Why weren't the planes up dropping water sooner than they were? What idiot flew a drone into the side of a fire plane that was dumping water?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so many things where you can always go back and look at a disaster and go, okay, here's what we did wrong. Again, none of that helps the victims. All right. It's not going to matter unless it's in your lawsuit against the city or whoever you're going after for the negligence. But these disasters are a chance to learn. But what I've seen is most of the time we don't. I'll give you a great example because it's in my new film, Built to Last, Buyer Beware. In Mexico Beach, which was in the last house standing, after Hurricane Michael, Category 5 hurricane wiped them out, they raised the building code. They made it tougher. They didn't raise it enough to survive another Category 5, but they made it harder to build low to the ground houses. People complained so much. They lowered it. They dropped the building code back down. It's less than it was before Hurricane Michael. So that's not an example of a town learning. Another one in the state of Florida, you know, the Surfside collapse of those condos where all those people were killed because they hadn't done the maintenance on the building. So they put in an ordinance that required mandatory inspections of condos at certain milestones to make sure that they're safer. Well, I just met with a guy last week who's telling me, keep an eye out. The legislature is going to drop that because people that own condo associations are complaining that it's killing the condo industry. So they're going to take that away. And to me, that's like, are you kidding me? So because people are complaining that they have to fix their condo, we won't have to have you inspect. So how are they going to feel when their condo collapses? So it's like, are we learning anything?
Wow.
You guys are going to see firsthand. What did they learn out there and what are they going to do to make it better?
You know, something I think you could also help our listeners understand is what that recovery process is like, because initially when there's a disaster, there's 2 days of news about it and then it's gone and we forget about it. What is it like for the people, like, let's say in Florida after that major storm? Like, what are they doing right now? Or how long does it take to recover? What is the next process? Like, you have to find somewhere else to live, you contact the government. I mean, I'm just wondering, what are all of this? Like, how do you even go to work? What is it like for people after, like the week after, the month after, and the year after?
For some people, they never recover because, first of all, if you have kids and the schools burn down, you have to move somewhere else. So now you have to find another home. Now, is that other home anywhere near your job where you work or where the husband and wife work? And how far is that from the school where you obviously have to live in that area to enroll your kids in that school? So it's very disruptive for your family situation. What kind of insurance did you have? I hear a lot of people had their insurance canceled because insurance companies, I'm not a fan of the insurance industry. These people aren't stupid. They knew there was a fire risk. So what do? They canceled a lot of fire insurance policies. I mean, that's horrible to do that. I'm so against ever hearing that story. So a lot of people don't have insurance. So now you live in a house that maybe when you built it years ago was $50,000, $75,000. Now that lot is worth $1.5 million. It would cost you $1,000 a square foot to rebuild your house. Where are you getting the money for that? How would you ever rebuild that house? How will you ever recover? If some developer buys your lot, what are they going to pay you? Rudy, you probably know the answer. This 20, 30 cents on the dollar, they're going to steal it from you. They know you're distressed and they're going to get it for as little as possible. So your life is completely turned upside down. As one woman in my last film said, you wake up and she had money. You wake up and you have nothing. You don't have makeup. You don't have a toothbrush. You don't have your slippers. They may seem like vanity things. Imagine having nothing when you wake up the next morning. And I think your life is turned upside down and most people never recover in that particular area. They have to move away because how long do you think it's going to be till somebody can live in the Palisades? Other than the shopping area that Rick Caruso owned, what else is there? Nothing. The supermarkets are gone. The restaurants are gone. The banks are gone. The gas station's gone. I mean, there's nothing. So it's a very long recovery and it's made a lot worse if you have to fight for your rights with your insurance company. And that's what my new film is about. It's how that false promise of insurance. We've taken out insurance policies. We all do it on our property. Their goal is not to pay you. You walk into a casino, their goal is you're leaving with no money. And I think that's how the insurance companies are. We want your check every month. But when we have to give you money back, not such a priority of ours. And we'll make you fight for it. And sometimes that fight goes on 5, 6, 7 years. Most people can't afford that, so they give up. I mean, it's a very depressing future when you're the victim of a disaster. And that's why more than anything, our goal as people living in homes should be to avoid having that ever happen.
One of the things that I heard, I mean, now that I'm closer to a disaster, is that things like gift cards help because they will have to do things like buy new stuff for the kitchen. Like they have absolutely nothing. I don't know. I guess what hit me, because I was so close, I was in the yellow evacuation area, that I just started thinking, wait a minute, do you still have to pay a mortgage if the place doesn't exist anymore? So you're still paying a mortgage plus paying money for another place to live. That's insane to me.
Well, here in Florida, you still have to pay the mortgage. There's nothing that comes out that says you're granted a relief from paying your bank. So if the bank owned your property, they're going to want their money. I don't think they're going to just forgive that. I don't know what they're doing in California, because I imagine a lot of people had mortgages that's going to be a huge issue. But yeah, the bills go on for that. I heard, some people are probably still getting utility bills. It's crazy. And that's on top of you having to reorganize your entire life. I just see some posts on social media. I haven't talked to some of my friends whose houses burned down, but I see the kind of stuff they're going through. A lot of people do GoFundMes. I think people, the further you get away from a disaster, when it's not in your neighborhood, they get numb to it real quick because they're back to worrying about their own lives. So how do you keep that urgency in everybody's mind? I mean, you guys have the Olympics coming up in 4 years. What's that area going to be like? Yeah, I know there weren't going to be, it's not a central part of that, but it's such a part of a community that you're going, there's no happy face on it. I don't know how you're optimistic about it. I see what people are like here, how beat up they look when they're trying to put their house back together, and all the people that have moved out of our neighborhood since this has happened, and how they're tearing them down and they're going to build big new houses there. Things change forever. And this was known as a good mixed neighborhood where it was quiet and, the mixture of old houses and new houses, and all those old houses got wiped out. And so the question is, they had to know it some way, in some level, they had to know there was a risk there, right? You have a 1-story house in a flood zone. You had to know that it could flood, but you never think it's going to happen to you. I don't think anybody in these parts of the Palisades ever thought their house would burn down. And the same for a lot of the folks in Altadena. It wasn't in your thought process.
Let me just speak really quick about, not being a lawyer, but not an expert in this. I mean, out here in California, we have the anti-deficiency statutes, meaning that if you owe a debt and that debt is secured by real property, the holder of that debt, so the lender, can only go after the real property for up to whatever amount they can get for that real property. After that, they cannot then go after you individually for the deficiency, meaning if they don't get repaid from selling the underlying property, if they take over a property, they're still owed like a couple $100,000, they cannot turn around and sue you. So that's the anti-deficiency statutes. Now, walking away from a mortgage obviously completely damages your credit. For up to 7 years, you have to report that. There's also some tax implications of that as well, about forgiveness of a loan, and you got to pay income taxes on that. So that's just kind of some of the nuances that I'm sure that people are dealing with. Now, about utilities and the such, well, I mean, basically anybody, I believe, can stop their utility. If you own a house, right, and you move out of that house, like you call up the utility company and say, hey, I'm shut off service to my house effective as of X date. It's not like an ongoing evergreen contract. You're able to cancel that at any time, especially if they don't provide services to your house. Like, you should automatically be able to do that, but you have to follow whatever steps that are required. What I've heard about, at least temporarily, is people that were really scared and impacted. And you spoke to this, George, about the beautiful landscaping that we have out here in California. Well, if the neighborhood's burnt down, who's maintaining your trees? Who's maintaining your yards? Who's doing all that work? And that, even if those people weren't living in the Palisades or Malibu, they're going to be economically impacted by that. But I've already heard of some stories of people buying the lot next door to them from their destitute neighbor who just wants to sell, and now they're already putting in plans for like double mega mansions. I mean, I've heard this. I mean, this is legitimate. I'm not just making this up. We talked about it this weekend with some people, and all of a sudden, people want those landscape artists and architects and contracts, and they want to build. They want to move as fast as possible. It just makes me scratch my head, going, "Well, you're really going to put some of those builders at risk." I mean, it's so toxic toxic over there. Like, well, how do you properly make sure that it's cleaned up enough? Maybe your lot got cleaned up because you can afford it, but what about everything around there? What about driving to and from there? And this past weekend, George, I sent you the article of the newsletter I put out on Substack called The Commute, where I specifically called out our episode. This past weekend, I put out a new newsletter, and one of the articles in there that talked about how the unique nature of electronic vehicle lithium ion batteries and the toxic nature and the special care it takes to clean those up, because the chemicals and the other types of terrible things that those get dumped out when they get caught on fire. Pacific Palisades had a number of electric vehicles that burned, and people are learning how to clean that up. I raised the question of, boy, people got to start thinking about this type of stuff. If California is still going to move towards all electric vehicles in 2035, that's 10 years from now. How are we going to train our firemen? How are we going to pay for all the specialty cleanup? What are we going to do to account for the extreme danger of when an electric vehicle catches on fire? Thankfully, bright people in government are aware of this. There was an executive order that the governor had put out a couple years ago that addresses and recognizes the unique danger of electric vehicles when they catch on fire. But I'm not 100% sure that all of the citizens recognize that unique danger. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, George. I know we talked about EVs before and we've focused on that, but anything that's come up in any of your investigations?
Well, I know that a number of houses here from the hurricanes caught on fire because they left their car in the garage. And if an electric vehicle gets, especially Teslas, I don't know for other vehicles, if the battery gets really wet, it's combustible and it catches on fire, and it burned down some houses. We actually got notified. I don't remember if it was our insurance company or it was by Tesla when the hurricane was coming. Make sure you don't leave your car in an area that could flood. Now that seems obvious, but wow, it's good to know. And I didn't keep my car here. There was no chance I was going to, because I wouldn't want that to be my weak link. But yeah, that's always a fear when there's a disaster, is who is doing the cleanup? Because unless you see people walking around with hazmat suits, you probably see people with a truck and a claw, and they come by with a bulldozer. But how prepared are they for cleaning it up? And do they even know what they're cleaning up? That's a frightening thought. And then when people are let back in to rummage through what stuff they have left, how safe are they being when they go back there? I know you want to get back to your house. Who wouldn't? But it just could be such a toxic environment that I know it's different with things that burn than things that flood, even though, we had to acid wash our pool because there was so much filthy water that got into it. You have to spray down things outside, and that's from water. So fire presents a whole other level of problems. And I don't know, when you say smart people in government, that doesn't make me go to sleep at night and feel good, because if they were that smart, maybe they would have done more to prevent this from happening.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That goes to your point. And I'm not, believe me, George, when I'm saying I'm not, even though I work with government, I do government finance, I know a lot of people in government. This is not Rudy just covering his own back end. You even said during our recording, no matter what we could have done here, some of this was, we couldn't prevent it. These were unique circumstances. Should it have been this much of a disaster? No. Should water have been better managed? Yes. Should the brush have been better cleaned up? Absolutely. These circumstances were, as I wrote in my article, this is the price you pay when you live in paradise, man. Every once in a while, you got to get punched in the face. And I think it was fate. And yes, that's my film noir philosophy coming through. But I wake up every day and think, this is not a joke. I wake up every day sometimes and do like a little thanking of, oh, thank God the big one didn't happen last night. We're living on borrowed time, man. He out here in Southern California. This whole thing could be broken apart any minute. I don't know. That's my 2 cents. I don't know, Gwen, if you have any thoughts on that.
I guess what I'm thinking is, and this is for George, what are the questions that homeowners should be asking? It's so hard to prepare for the unimaginable. We haven't imagined it. Like, we didn't imagine 50 miles worth of hurricane fire. Like, the infrastructure does not exist to combat that. But now we know that that is possible. So we'll work toward it. I'm just wondering, what are the questions that somebody like in Florida or in California, when they want to buy, what are they supposed to be looking for?
Well, I think if they asked a lot of questions, they might live somewhere else, because you have to be willing to hear the answers. Having grown up out there, I was in some really big earthquakes. I don't like earthquakes. I would rather face the possibility of a hurricane than an earthquake, because an earthquake is so you don't get a warning. You could just be driving under an overpass and it collapses on you and you're gone. You could be in a high rise downtown and the building collapses and you're gone. And everybody says, yeah, but when your number's up, it's up. Well, that doesn't mean you should feel good living in a city where over half the buildings will get destroyed by a major earthquake because they weren't built properly. So the thing is, if you truly ask the questions, be ready to hear the answers. So if you're buying a house, know what the fire coverage is for that area. Know what the plan is if you had to evacuate your community. Make sure you can get fire insurance on the house before you buy it. And can you get coverage that would allow you to recover afterwards? Know how fire safe that house is. You just have to ask a lot of questions that most of us never ask when we're looking at houses. You want to know, is the school good? Is it near a park where your kids could play? Is the crime low so it's fairly safe? But nobody really wants to ask the tough questions, because I think if you did, the answers would stop you from doing it. When Rudy says the cost of living in paradise, that's what everybody says in Florida. But ask anybody after a disaster if it was worth it.
That's
So
right.
go around the Palisades now and say, was it worth living in paradise for what you're going to be going through for the next 5 or 10 years? A lot of people would probably say no.
That's right.
There's other people that would say, yeah, but you know what? I took a risk. Those are the consequences, but I love it here. I'm going to rebuild. Well, that may be great if you're 30 years old, but what if you're 70 or 75? Do you want a 5 or 10 year rebuilding project that is going to be very difficult to live with? So the thing is, you have to ask a lot of questions. Everybody should call the local floodplain manager before they move someplace. Find out what the flood risk is. How was your house built to withstand that? For fire, I would get an inspection and know what my vulnerabilities are with fire. But you have to be willing to ask a lot of questions, and you can't just ignore the answers because you fall in love with a property. It's
That's
like,
right. No, you're right, George. I mean, literally everything you said is right. And I bet you that those 60 and 70-year-old people will not be going through a good portion of them will not be going through the rebuilding process. They're probably the ones that are selling their lots to that neighbor that had been eyeing, oh boy, now I get to put in the basketball court for me. Now I get to put in my pool. Now I get to do this. Rightly or wrongly, those younger people or those richer people, they're going to expand their lots, and we're going to see my opinion, we're going to see massive mega mansions being built in Pacific Palisades. I think it's going to be a lot less homes.
there was one of those real estate reality show guys I saw interviewed on the news. I forget what his name is, but he thought that over half of the people would be new people that moved back into the Palisades.
Definitely.
Because a lot of them aren't going to be able to afford it.
Absolutely.
And that's, to me, that's so sad, because that wipes out all the people that I knew that, they may be living in legacy homes where it was passed down from their parents to them, and then they pass it down to their kids. And as you know about real estate, what they built it for then is not what you'd have to build it for now. When you're talking over $1,000 a square foot, what do you think those houses were built for? Probably very little. I mean, a lot of those houses in the Palisades when I was growing up were $50,000, $75,000. You can't even get a car for that now.
I think that I hate to say this, George, is very depressing for me to say. That Pacific Palisades that you have in your memories, that Pacific Palisades that you grew up with, and that I had relatives that lived there too. It's gone, man. It ain't ever coming back. It's just it can't. The charm and the homes and the families. I mean, it's awful. But what's going to be built there it's not going to resemble what was there. I just don't think so. And I think that's extremely sad, because it was a really amazing part of Los Angeles. And I don't know how the city ever recovers from that. I really don't. I hope I'm not being too...
No, it'll be a difference.
Straight up. I'm just trying to be honest.
It'll be different. It'll have a different vibe. It'll all be different. But you're right. We're just grieving the loss of that.
Yeah, but tell me what it means to say we're going to relax the building codes, the building process. I want to know what that actually means. That's going to be very important in determining what gets rebuilt and the quality that it gets rebuilt. Imagine trying to find enough manpower and workers to even rebuild all those houses. What do you see on a block sometimes? 1 or 2, 3 new houses a year. Yep. And how many people like their builder after the process? So how many people are going to have somebody that is going to come in and, is it going to be a KB home neighborhood?
Right.
That the Palisades is going to be? Is it going to D.R. Horton's going to rebuild the Palisades? My God.
It's possible, man. I'm telling you, George, I don't know what I'm talking about when I say relax the permitting standards. What I'm saying is I want something to be built back there as soon as humanly possible. But this is where I struggle. This is why earlier in the show, I was literally struggling to get the words out, because I'm struggling with this. Like, I don't know what the right answer is. I just don't.
You know, the place that's going to be rebuilt the quickest is that trailer mobile home area on Temescal that when I was growing up, everybody wanted that place to get shut down. It's like, that is the most valuable real estate with a beautiful view. And why are there just mobile homes sitting on there? Well, you can put another mobile home there tomorrow if you clean the lot. So they might be the smartest people of all. Yeah, what is going to be rebuilt? It's a frightening thought. And that's going to tell a lot, is what did they learn and how are they going to do it differently? Well, those things don't all go together because it takes a while to figure out what you should be doing. But a lot of people don't want to put that kind of time into it because you want to get back to your life.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a tough one.
It is bringing back to your life. Like my cousin that did get evacuated, he said the most important thing that he wanted to get back for the sake of his children and for the sake of his own sanity was a routine. He said, I got to get the kids to school every day. I got to get back to my judo studio. I got to get back to my routine. And I think that's what happens, right? People just, whatever it is, they get impacted. The routine gets impacted and they immediately want to get back to some kind of a new routine. And then they oftentimes you start to forget. You start to self-heal. I don't think anybody will ever forget these wildfires, but it was interesting during our last podcast episode, we brought up the point about how old the prior Malibu fires were and how old the hurricanes were and how those were already yesterday's news. Now, this was 2 years ago. At some point, unfortunately, these wildfires are going to be yesterday's news. And I don't know how that's going to shake out with the building and people moving back in and people's focus and people stopping and looking at their own living situation and trying to fortify their own homes. Right? I mean, I talked about on our last podcast episode that we had an earthquake that I believed caused some damage and I did some retrofitting. Well, now what am I going to do for wildfires? You know, George, turns out I've got a couple of palm trees in my backyard. And when you were talking there, I was thinking, oh boy, George brings up a good point. Do I need those palm trees there? Should I be taking those down? Do I live in a wildfire area? I don't. It's very low risk. I already looked it up. But George still brings up a very good point. How long does that stay in my brain? Or does my own routine of life take me away from these preventative measures that I should be taking? You know what I'm saying? Like it's hard.
I actually have an answer for that because I see it here. The people who were wiped out will never forget it. But if you live in a house that was not damaged, that you dodged a bullet, those folks have the shortest memory. You know, when you're driving down the road and you look down at your cell phone and you slam on your brakes because you almost hit somebody stepping off the sidewalk, you're shaken for about 2 minutes. Then you get down the road a little further and you just go on with whatever you're doing. You don't think about it. And it's the same thing with disasters. I know most of my neighbors aren't doing anything to prepare for next hurricane season. I'm the only one. If they knew the things I was doing, I just raised the level of my air conditioners. I'm going to raise the level of my generator. I raised our pool. I'm going to get flood barriers. I mean, I'm going to be like the third pig, just making his house a fortress because it scared the crap out of me. I didn't like it, but I'm actually going to do something about it. Most people are just going to go on with their lives. They're going to go, whew, it's not going to happen to me. You know, there's one guy we talked to every time we walk the dogs, and he was bragging right before Hurricane Helene. He said, my house is never flooded. I'm not worried about it. Well, he's not living there right now. His house flooded. So the people that get affected will never forget. The people who dodge the bullet probably already have forgotten.
Yeah, that's, oh my goodness. I was thinking about that question, or I mean, rather your answer. Hey, look, Rudy, you asked a question to a guest and he gave an answer. Rudy always says that my philosopher guests don't answer the question. They just have more questions. So George, thank you. You answered a question for Rudy.
George, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Thank you.
Are you a philosopher?
Not really.
Okay,
no.
so did you hear that,
Yeah.
Gwen? George answered a question because he's not so, overly focused on the esoteric study of philosophy. However, George, I got to ask, if you don't mind, this is a really good point. The people that have gone through these disasters and they've either rebuilt or in the process of rebuilding, how do they do it, man? What is their philosophy? Are they religious people? Like, are they kind of nutso like me, who's like, it's fate. If it happens, you got to deal with it and move on. I don't know. I'm just curious. Hey, what is their philosophy if they have one?
This. I may not have as good an answer for this one. I think it's people that have ties to an area, and that's not a philosophy. It's probably a lifestyle, and they care so much about the area that they want to have their roots there, and they find a way to go forward and go on with their lives. Unfortunately, insurance and regulations sometimes make that a lot more difficult because if you don't have the money, how are you rebuilding? A lot of people might want to rebuild, but they can't. So it's dictated by how prepared you were, what kind of safety net you had going into the disaster. If you live in a condo and there's $100,000 assessment and you don't have it, well, they're going to take your condo away from you. It's going to be repossessed, right? They're going to foreclose on it. So you don't always have control of that, but But the people, you see it on the news, the people that used to get flooded every year on the Mississippi, and they go, we're going to rebuild. We love it here. We're hardy. This is our home. When is enough enough? To me, a close call is enough because I don't want to lose everything. But a lot of people have they're more trenched in with their spirit of how much they want to stay someplace. So they'll put up with almost anything. I just think that that's an attitude that can cost you everything you have. And we keep seeing examples of where that happens. So somebody says, maybe this will serve as a wake-up call. I hate that expression. Why are you not awake already? We've had enough wake-up calls. There's been plenty. And I think until it happens to you, most people don't wake up.
That's why the evacuations are also difficult, because people don't really think it'll happen, right?
Well, you know what happens to people that are evacuated? I used to be a TV weatherman, and we would tell people, you have to leave your area. It's under an evacuation. And then they would evacuate, and the storm would turn and miss. And they would actually call angry that I told them to evacuate when they didn't have to. What they should have been saying is, thank you for warning me. I'm glad it didn't happen, and we'll be ready next time. But instead, people are annoyed that you disrupted their lives and made them move, and then you were wrong about it. Would they have rather their house was wiped out? And then they go, hey, thanks. I'm glad you told us. So that's the problem. You tell people that something's coming, they evacuate, nothing happens, they're mad. Something does happen, and you warned them that it could happen, then they're mad that nobody told them or they didn't hear it. So it's hard to find a safe spot here because you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Gwen, just to try to tie this to some kind of philosophical teaching, I'm trying to apply what I've learned from you over 6 years of this. Sisyphus, who's damned to keep pushing the rock up the hill and continued to do so, is that similar to what we're talking about here, about these people that either keep rebuilding in these areas that are damned and should not be rebuilt? Is that kind of similar or no? Am I conflating something?
I think the boulder is the habit of life. That's what we do. So I think the people who are going to rebuild, it's like you choose, okay, so you've got the habit of life, and that's the boulder. But according to Camus, who wrote about the myth of Sisyphus, that the disposition of the person pushing the boulder up the hill, that's where freedom is. So back to George's point, this idea of rebuilding, and yes, you got to do it and got to get up and go back to the habit of life, but you have the freedom to think about it, how you're going to push it up, what's going to go through your mind. So you have that opportunity. We don't just have to throw our hands up and say, oh, disasters happen. We have a way of thinking about how we navigate it. So I think that would be it. And I think maybe if I can wrap up, I mean, George, since you've been in the media, what do you think is the media's responsibility? Like, as you're watching the coverage of these, what is the media's responsibility for maybe making us aware? Or are they falling short? Or what do you think is going on there? Or are they doing an excellent job?
Well, I think the media does a really good job covering the disaster. What you do after the disaster, it's like, what's the next big story? The other day, it was wall to wall on that horrific plane crash. But then the next day, there was another plane crash. So the story went on to there. And then it went on to tariffs that everybody's getting. So they don't go back and relive the first bad thing that happened. So the question is, how much will they forget it? On a national perspective, every now and then during a football game or a sporting event, they throw in help the people in California, but it's a very casual mention. It's not going to move the meter. So how does the local news media do it? Well, they're broadcasting the victims. So who are you really telling? The Weather Channel's there for the hurricane, but then they're gone. They go to the next storm. And so the problem is, what do the people that are left behind do? They're really not going to get a lot of support other than what they can generate themselves. You hope the media stays on it. I hope they stay on top of how people are allowed to rebuild. I know here, if your house flooded and you had flood insurance, they let you fix your house, but they don't tell you have to fix it differently so it doesn't flood again. I think that's insane. It's like, if you know something, if I keep hitting my thumb with the hammer, somebody's got to tell me how to hammer differently. You can't just keep paying me when I damage my thumb. This is a tough one. And that's such a mess out there that somebody here, me sitting in Florida, can't weigh in enough. You guys have a lot ahead of you.
There was this one local reporter, and she was on TikTok. People were commenting, asking if she could check on their house. And that ended up being all she did. So somebody would type in their address, and since she had access, she would go with the camera and make a show to let people know if their home was there or not. It was really incredible work to give, what she was doing with her time to give other people a sense of comfort or just knowledge that she would check on their homes.
That's really tough for those people covering those stories because, first of all, some of them had houses that were damaged themselves.
And the firefighters' families.
That's really tough, but it's very Yeah. And it's very emotional, though, when you're around victims like that, because you have to be so sensitive to what they're going through because you can't even imagine it. So those reporters did a terrific job covering those horrific situations. And that was good that she was able to do that. That made, at least she was able to do something that gave her a feeling of she made a difference.
Yeah.
That's
Did
great.
you see that clip? It went viral. It was before the hurricanes. When did that massive one hit? Was it in November or October? It was just
I thought they were in, gosh, it's a
oh
blur
no,
now,
it's a
late September.
oh
Helene
my
and
God.
Milton back to
Did
back.
did you see that viral clip? It was I think it was a meteorologist when he was an older gentleman, and when he was looking at the map, and then when you see the look on his face when he realizes how big it is, and he started to tear up a bit. Did you see that?
I didn't see, I don't remember that particular one, but you can tell from their tone when they know it's serious. It's like we were 25 miles away from most of my area getting wiped out. If Hurricane Milton hadn't turned and gone a little further south, the trauma center, #1 hospital here in Tampa, would have been under 20 feet of water. So people here, a lot of people got wiped out, but they didn't even get wiped out by a bullseye. And if you're watching local media, when something is worse than others, when your local meteorologist isn't smiling anymore, it's now, folks, you got to prepare. This is going to be bad. With the fire, you could see that. It was almost a hopeless situation because you're just seeing house after house burn down. And you get behind on something like that, there's nothing you can do. It's going to be a long road back.
Okay, last question. Have you seen, there's a weatherman who's gotten pretty famous for he sneaks in lyrics from Kendrick Lamar in his weather reports. Have you seen that? It's
I
the
have not seen
funniest
that.
thing.
I have not.
Okay, George, thank you so
I'm
much.
glad you ended this on a little bit of a on a funnier note, Gwen.
You gotta see Weatherman
George.
sneaks
How
in
do we
Kendrick Lamar
stay happy
lyrics.
here? What do we do here, man? I mean, trying to.
How do you stay
How do
happy?
we stay
Go to
happy?
Nobu and have some sushi. Go down to the beach on a nice day. I don't
Take
know.
care
I
of
mean,
your friends.
growing up there, I don't know if I could live out there again because of all the challenges that take place. My heart breaks for the people that are dealing with the problems. People that love LA, love California, they're not going anywhere. Most of them, they're gonna find a way to recover. But like I say, it's gonna be a long road.
Thanks, man. We appreciate you coming on. We appreciate you being a friend of the podcast. I'm sure this is not going to be the last time we hear from you. We're going to continue to promote your films, promote everything that you do. We think that what you do is so vitally important today.
Well, Built to Last, Buyer Beware, my new film that I'm trying to get on a major carrier. I'll keep you in the loop when I get that done.
Please do. We're supporters.
Good is in the Details is produced by Dr. Gwendolyn and Rudy and Rudy Sallow. If you're enjoying the show, please hit that subscribe button, that follow button, give it a rating, a review, take a screenshot, and share it on Instagram. Good is in the Details pod. When you tag us on Instagram, the first listener to tag us gets a giveaway. Yes, we're running another one. You can also go to our website to get in touch. Do you have an idea for an episode, or would you like to book a Zoom call to consult about your idea for a podcast? Go to goodisinthedetails.com. You can also find information about our past guests and their books. We'd also like to thank our sponsor for this episode, AvonmoreInc.com. It's that small bridge business that started in the 90s and grew to an international sensation amongst bridge players. Plan your next bridge party by going to AvonmoreInc.com. They have coasters, tallies, smart playing cards, which are also great for kids. Let them know Good is in the Details sent you. Remember to check out the show notes for links to George's work. You can also check us out on Blue Sky, patreon.com/goodisinthedetails, and of course, goodisinthedetails.com. Okay, until next time, bye.